to like the nonfiction work that I do, such as For the Nib, and then my autobio work, which is really kind of how I started in comics. So for this sort of stuff, usually it's something that I just find interesting that I feel like needs to be addressed, and I want to use comics as a way to do that. And they usually focuses around issues of culture, race, identity, sort of stuff like that, and science. But for my autobio work, I guess the thing I always ask myself is like, why would somebody want to read this, or why should someone care? I think that's an issue that is often present in autobio, is like straddling that line between being self-indulgent and then also telling a story that is universal and relatable to other people. And I do write a lot about identity. It's something, as a person of color, as a black person, as someone who who's multiracial, I've always struggled with. It's something that I'm interested in when I look at my family history, so I do like to write about those things. But I also write about a variety of other things. I like talking about relationships. I like talking about mental health. Like, there's so many other things. So I often do feel like sometimes I get peg-pulled as like a race cartoonist. And that's one thing I like, but it's not everything I like. And I think that's something that sometimes creators who are have marginalized identities have to be wary of, is getting pigeonholed and feeling like they don't have that space to try to explore other things.
So I'm weird. I keep saying that. So a lot of my creative work sort of dovetails with and overlaps with a lot of my academic work and like my research and education.
Right.
And all of it has kind of been aimed at, I guess, not just deconstructing my own white privilege or my own whiteness, but I don't know, recognizing it and helping other people to recognize it. Not recognize that I actually wrote a thing about, hey, I'm white, because people weren't sure. But because I did this book called Black Comics, so anyway. But like, okay, so I apologize for this tangent. I teach this one class, undergrad class. And this undergrad kid, white kid from affluent Northwest Chicago suburb, and he sort of it was very out of the blue, kind of like the story, but it was like he was writing about an African-American computer scientist for this assignment, but he wrote this long screed about how he refused to talk about that gentleman's race because he should be recognized just for his accomplishments. So it was like colorblind racism, right? And this is really outside the topic of this particular class, but I mean, it's overall a class about cultural studies, so I'm like, well, I need to touch on this. So I, explained very delicately what colorblind racism was, although I went with colorblind fallacy, because I felt like he would feel better about it. He's a freshman, and I've been there, and I want to be a jerk or something. But at the end of it, he was defensive for a while, and we talked for a while, and at the end of it, he shook my hand. And I'm like, well, I feel like maybe I made the world a tiny bit better with that, right? And any little bit that I can do to sort of puncture these conversations. I mean, this is why Witt's comic is like my favorite ever, because it's like a actual reasoned, complex, thoughtful discussion, whereas it's not the usual like you're right or you're wrong.
Right.
None of this is really answering the question. But a lot of my creative work sort of, I force myself into these uncomfortable places of I've written. Well, with Kindred, I'm adapting the work of like the most famous African-American science fiction writer of at least her generation, also a genius, official genius. And prior to that, John and I did this book called The Whole, that the main characters are a biracial woman and African-American man. So I've done a lot of this work of writing characters who are different from myself. And part of that is to force myself to confront those things that I don't know. So I guess for me, a lot of my creative work is sort of making the change within myself that I would also like to see with others.
Right.
If that makes sense.
All right, so if this is just think about this for a second. If you could change, if you could launch one thing, and this is a guaranteed success. So whatever it is, it's going to sell, as many copies as American Born Chinese. So if you can launch something into the world, and I'm sort of joking, but I'm not, because I know that comic changed a lot of people's conversations about Asian American identity, right? There are a lot of people who found a certain kind of vocabulary from that work. So if each of you could launch a work like that would change the conversation, what would that work be?
Comics for Choice.
What?
I don't know. I mean, it's unlikely to be as successful as American-born Chinese, but that was definitely me taking a crack at like what I feel needs to be out there the most right now in terms of like educating people who are maybe theoretically pro-choice about like all the different reasons that somebody might seek an abortion, the history of it, different ways that people feel about it, different laws that are currently in place that are obstacles, just to like just to make everybody else, or hopefully everybody, feel as passionately about it so they can be like more informed in defending those rights. And I don't know, it's probably not going to convert anybody who's already staunchly pro-choice, or staunchly pro-life, but I want the pro-choice majority to be able to mobilize.
Right. So I'm friends with Andrew Iden, who's one of the co-writers of March. So I will try to get the book to me. I'll get it to him so he can give it to Mike Pence. We'll talk after, but let's make that happen. So I'm gonna be like, what is this? Oh my God! Right? Yeah, as long as right. It would have to be Andrew.
Yeah, if I could send it to the whole Republican caucus,
right.
maybe that's the thing.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
No, seriously. I mean, John Lewis gets it and he reads it into the congressional record. I mean, why not? Right? I mean, when people are filibustering, what's his name read Green Eggs and Ham when he was filibustering? Right? So why not read it into the congressional record? I'm sorry.
I like hearing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I want to obviously echo Hazel, who, by the way, is doing a phenomenal job as an editor. If I had to say for my own personal work, I've slowly been working on this story for years that I stopped just because, I also work full time, so I'm always trying to balance things. But I started this story for this website years ago called Passing, which was based off of a true story of a family friend who pretty much moved to California in the 60s to change her identity and pass for white. And I wrote this whole story about it. It started as a screenplay that I wrote in college that won some award, and then I just forgot about it forever. And then I kind of started to rewrite it for comics. And I want to make a book out of it, but I kind of abandoned it a year and a half ago, so maybe one day.
Kickstarter.
Sounds up the time now.
Yeah, it's the time.
Of course.
What was the question? Something that succeeds like American-born Chinese and changing the conversation.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I did that just to get you to be like, oh, less uncomfortable, super uncomfortable. Sorry. Well, I guess Black Comics Returns is this one book that's actually coming out in September. It's the sequel of a coffee table book that John and I, we co-edited, collecting work from, I think we're at 100 African-American, or not even African-American, but Black comics creators, because some are from Africa and some are from the Caribbean and stuff. That is just sort of it's a good example of just the sheer diversity of creators out there who fall under, who are called Black, but each individual artist has their own stories and style, and we just really like having those books out there because it sort of, at least based on the first book, seems to lead people to new creators and new works. Similarly, John and I did some art exhibition type stuff around that, and I'd like to do that with this book, just because it's sort of shining the light on lots of people who maybe readers aren't familiar with. Wit's in that book too, right? Yeah, Wit's in that book, so you should believe. But, for my personal work, I don't know, I had this weird novel idea where it's an anti-war space opera. I want to do anti-war Star Wars. It'll probably be another 20 years before I figure out what that even means. Anyway, sorry. But yeah, Black Comics Returns, coming from Lion Forge, September. I'm just chilling. This is bad. Sorry. Never mind.
I'm really interested in mind force, by the way. I would love to talk to you about that later. It's kind of awesome. Anyways, I had a short story in an anthology called We Need Diverse Books, put out by the We Need Diverse Books organization. I did a short story with Tin Pham and a whole bunch of different folks from children's writing are going to be in this book. I'm super excited about it. I hope it does great.
I should also, there's this Facebook page, We Need Diverse Comics, that Dr. Carol Tilley is the head of, and I occasionally post it on YouTube. But it's a lot of good resources for finding, for reading without walls.
I think now is the point where I open this up for questions from the audience. So just raise hands and stand. And I just want to remind everyone that it is questions and not testimonials. So if you have a question, please ask a question. Don't stand up and offer up a monologue, please. Yes, sir.
Hi, yes, this one is for Jin Yang, and you did the Chinese version of Superman. So what are some of the limitations, and did you achieve what you want to achieve?
So the question is about New Superman, which is a monthly comic series that I'm writing for DC Comics. I was privileged enough to get to do 10 issues of the main Superman story, and after that I had conversations about what I might do next for DC Comics. And they called me up one day and they're like, don't be offended by this. Well, what if we do a Chinese Superman? And I was like, that sounds terrible. That sounds like an idea. I want nothing to do with that. And the reason why I thought it was such a horrible idea is because I grew up with some very specific views about politics in China. My dad was born in Taiwan. My mom was born in mainland China, but she left just as the Communist Party came to power. And it took me a long time. It took me well into my adulthood to realize that what I grew up with was just one side of a larger conversation, and that things are much more nuanced than how I thought they were. But even so, I felt like Superman was Superman supposed to represent truth, justice, and the American way. What does that mean? What does that mean in modern China? And I thought, man, too many landmines. I don't want to touch that. But then I got called into DC Comics' Burbank offices, which are kind of awesome for like a geek to go into. They have like these giant statues of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman wearing the costumes that they're wearing in the upcoming Justice League movie. I got called into Jim Lee's office. Jim Lee is the co-publisher at DC Comics. He did this legendary run on X-Men when I was in high school. I had to go and line up to get Jim Lee's autograph. So he called me into his office. He told me that New Superman was his idea. I didn't hear anything else after he said that. I was looking at his face, you know what I mean? And after that, I was like, I guess we're doing this. I feel like they have been super supportive. I feel like the ambivalence that I feel about my relationship to Chinese culture, and the fact that I don't have real experience living in China, right? And I don't even know how I feel about the political stuff. But I feel like they've given me the space to express some of that ambivalence within the story. So I'm happy about that. Thanks for the question.
Alrighty. Back left. Stand up, sis.
I wanted the whole volume 1 when it first came out. Is there any chance that it will be completed?
The volume 1 of
The whole.
The whole. Oh, like the whole. I'm sorry. I thought you meant the WH whole volume 1, the book the whole. I do that too. I hope. So here, that book was published by a small publisher in Chicago who was actually mostly just this one guy named Doug. So they went out of business because it's a guy named Doug publishing articles. I mean, he's a great guy. But since then, it's been kind of the issue is finding a way to make a living off of it enough to actually do it. You know what I mean? To like buy the time to do the second volume. The other issue is we wrote that book, created whatever the book in 2008, and like I can't write the same way I used to, because I'm a different person now. And the same with John. He's talked about how like it would have to be a very different work. We have ideas for a second volume that we are constantly talking about. We'd really like to do it. Maybe we'll try to do like a crowdfunder or something. But it's a very fraught political work and very. I understand with the Superman thing. There's lots of landmines there, and like when we did the first book, nobody was paying attention to us, so we're like, yeah, we'll just do whatever crazy thing. It's fine. These days, I don't know. I mean, it's not like we are, well, we're afraid of it in different ways. Like I got an ulcer when I was working on the first book, for example. The hole gave me a hole. We were like curating a thing, and I was like, anyway, it's a very fraught thing, especially in this political climate. It feels more and more necessary, and we definitely want to do it, but it's just sort of finding the right venue and way to do it. We talked about doing it as an art show, as like a multimedia thing. What do you want? You just want a second book? What do you want?
So I just want to see like how the ideas were developed, everything that's happened, since 2008, and how you go about it. Because I like how you and Damien talk, like how you.
I'm Damien. John's the other guy. He'll be here tomorrow. I'm Damien.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, but I just like how like the styles of work, how everybody like graffiti, how like dove into career and all that, and the potential of like everything being turned to commodity, everything being integrated. I really like the themes explored in that book.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I hope we do.
All right. In the hat.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Hey, Gene. So, Gene.
I like your hat, by the way.
Yeah, thanks. It represents artistics. So you're saying that comic companies like Marvel or DC are trying to cut down the diversity thing because of
Well, no, that was,
I don't
that was no. He didn't say that. So just to reiterate, there was the second in command at Marvel Comics said like yesterday or 2 days ago that they were going to be sort of canceling some of their comics, right? But Marvel puts out like 50 comics a month, so if they cancel 20% of their line, they're going to cancel 10 comics and still have 40. And he explained when we're going to be canceling some of them because the ones that were about diversity aren't doing as well. There's some truth to that, but there's also some falsehood to that. That has nothing to do. I mean, that's a Marvel thing. I mean, he doesn't write for Marvel, so and I can't say anything more than that. But just to say that I think that this room, in the interest in this room, sort of gives the lie to that editor, right? I think again, if the stories were well thought out, they would do well.
and also you guys said the best way to introduce diversity is by an indirect. Do it, convey it indirectly or something like a Gene, like Gene Yang, your personal life, right?
Yeah, I just think I think I think there's a place for issue comics, right? There's a place for every kind of comic. There's a place for issue comics, but I think that when you're writing fiction, if you're writing from a place of trying to explain an issue, often it'll come out in this really weird didactic way. That you have to actually push that issue through a lived experience, so that it frays at the edges before you write about it. That was my point. Yeah, that was my point. But can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
Question. Is that cool? Can I ask a follow-up question?
This is a conversation. Let's go.
My follow-up question is this. I think a lot of the problem of diversity within comics is limiting our idea of what comics is to just superheroes, right? And there's so much more. The world of comics is so much more diverse than just superheroes. So I was hoping to ask all of you for like some recommendations. Is that cool? Do you all have
No, my last question.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, you can do it. So.
There's a lot of great comics coming out of Richmond, Virginia right now. A lot of Black cartoonists. It seems to be this hub right now.
Yeah.
And not all these people are still there, but just some people, for instance, Richie Pope, Chris Kindred, Shannon Wright, and many more. It seems to have been like this, and Chris Visions too. There's a lot of people there who are producing some really thoughtful and beautifully executed work. So that would just be one.
Yeah, if you look for Richie Pope on his Instagram, he's really good at linking to the crew from Richmond.
And he's here at Mocha.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. He's in the. Yeah. Okay.
process this a little more.
Okay.
I'm sorry, this is always the hardest question for me, but
All
I'll
right.
think about it and then shout it out maybe. If
All right, cool.
That was gonna be my thing.
You don't like
You're
answering
what?
questions.
I apologize
No,
for
no,
jumping.
no, it's okay.
No, it's like, I'll say 2 people and then I leave out, 5 minutes later. I'm like, oh, I should have said this person.
Well, actually, let me jump in there.
Yeah.
Just honestly, walk the floor and have conversations, right? I mean, you're actually in the right place to sort of experience a lot of what comics have to offer. And what's, it always happened like last year, Chris Ware was here, and everyone was like clustered around the great Chris Ware, and he's a wonderful cartoonist. I loved everything he ever did. But there's a person 2 pages after, there's no one there, and just sitting there watching 70 people try to get at Chris Ware. Like, hey, walk over here and talk to this person. You might be, amazed by what they have to offer and what they're doing, right? So I think in terms of, trying to diversify your media diet, you're literally in the right place for that, right? I mean, you are all going to go get in line for this guy, which I understand, but, you can have your friend hold your slot line and then go run over here and talk to someone else and then come back, and you guys can take turns sort of bopping all around. It's one of the, it's what I do. It's one of the ways you sort of find people and find new ideas.
Can I mention 2 other websites? Well, one is Mari Naomi, who's based in California. She started the Cartoonists of Color database, and there's also an LGBTQ database. And they're both like growing very quickly with links to creators' works. Also, Women Who Draw is another good site for female illustrators and cartoons.
And just one more, there's a woman, she's in Chicago, Spike Trutman?
Yeah.
Right, and Spike's stuff is amazing, right?
Iron City Comics.
Yeah.
Iron Circus, sorry. Iron Circus.
So Spike here? No. Okay. Anyway, but Spike Trotman's work, she's a queer black woman publisher, so she's awesome. Anyways.
I was going to say, Micheline has Alice in Ovenland.
Yeah.
It's a really cool all-ages book.
Mhm.
I just finally finished. Don't tell her I just finished it. But yeah, that was really good if you're looking for a good all-ages book.
Do you have anything to recommend?
I was big Mariko and Julian Tamaki fan more, and this one summer I think it was one of the best graphic novels that came out recently. And Mariko's working on Supergirl right now. She's doing a Supergirl miniseries that we'll also check out.
But yes.
Oh, I just have another question.
Yeah, no, I know.
Okay. My name is Leo Kilos. I'm an illustrator, author-illustrator, working in children's literature. And there was something that came up that was spurred on some questions for me, and it was regarding, I think it's really kind of a backlash that's, not a backlash, but it's this whole diversity in books. I think I'm seeing what feels to be like a lack of authenticity and truth in that, especially from illustrators working in the industry where they hear, okay, publishers are looking for diversity in books, and every character is going to be a black character. And I don't know if this is really a question.
I can actually make it a question.
Okay, I guess what I'm hoping for is that a response, and how do we deal with it? I mean, is it like post-diversity in books?
So just to paraphrase what his comment into a question. So it is true that in the last several years we've had a push for diversity, but the diversity is on the page and not necessarily in who's creating the work, right? And so this is what you're talking about, right? And so when you have diversity, right. And so when you have diversity on the page, but not in the form of the creators themselves, you often have notes that ring false, right? And what, for me, what's interesting, I am heavily into Twitter, so I am a card carrier with Black Twitter. And so for me, what's interesting is when you have a white writer create a character of colors, and you have black people say, hey, I really like your character, but why didn't they do this? Or if they're from South Carolina, then this should have been a thing. Or and what they're really doing is they're showing the sort of gaps and the limitations in the research, and then the person responds incredibly defensively, right? And I think that's where you see that, oh, this is just a cash grab, right? I was going to, like, my next book was not going to be purchased because another book about, the same old is not going to do it. So, and so yes, I like to, for you guys to answer this as well, because I mean, if you're writing a queer, or if you're reading about a queer character as someone who is in fact queer, and you're like, well, this is not how that works, or you're, I mean, it's funny, Damien, how you're associated with blackness because of the stuff that you do. So, or if you're reading, about a character who's Asian, and it's like, well, what's going on here? This seems off, right? And then it turns out they've all been written by Bendis, sorry. So if each of you could respond to that, I think that this is the concern that you're trying to get at, and it's actually a really insightful question. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like I said before, it takes work to build thoughtful characters and thoughtful storytelling that are well researched, and it does. I think it is indicative of the fact that there are a lot of creators of color who are looking for those opportunities. And it's not just that, it's like, how do people down the line perceive these things as being marketable if they're written from a really authentic voice? I think sometimes, chances might not be taken on these creators. And so it's really an issue of getting opportunities. So I think, we need to look at like how authentic are these stories, but further down, like we have to look, or further upstream, whether we need to look at who's being hired, who's getting these opportunities.
Yeah, it takes work on the side of the publisher to not just go with the people who are the most already obvious or famous or popular, because that skews heavily towards white men. So I think it's incumbent upon publishers to just look as many places as possible, read the Cartoonists of Color database and try to think even outside of that. And I guess if you're a white man, sorry, you just have to try really hard and try not to try to make room for other voices in the conversation as well.
I totally agree with Hazel. I actually see it as two different questions. I think I know just from experience how much fear you gotta fight just to get a story on the page, right? And I'm very reluctant to add any fear to any writer's part. So I would never tell a writer that they couldn't write a character that is different from them. But if you are writing out of your own experience, I think you gotta approach it with humility. You gotta be willing to do your homework. You gotta be willing to have some insiders to what you're writing, comment on your stuff. So I would never put that on a writer. But I do think that if you look at the publishing industry as a whole, and 90% of stories about a specific demographic are written by people outside of that demographic, the gatekeepers need to ask themselves questions at that point, right? That's not on the writer. I think that's on the gatekeepers.
Oh yeah, one more thing on that. Yeah, you can hire consultants when you're writing outside of your own experience, and I think oftentimes that's the best way to go. Either, maybe your editor or your agent is somebody who is paid to look at your work, or there's outside consultants, like my friend May Rude does a lot of consulting on writing trans women characters in comics, and the paying them factor is really important too, because then otherwise you just become the white friend who's going, hey, is this racist? Or whatever you're thinking that is.
Okay. All the way in the back, the young lady in the back, glasses.
So this is kind of a question directed at you, but you can kind of open it to the whole panel. So as a creator or writer, when you're writing about a diverse character, how do you balance between stereotypical or cliche and relatable? Because I feel like sometimes, you can write a scene or write something, and then other people will be like, hey, isn't that a cliche or isn't that a stereotype?
Okay, so for me, I don't know if I've done it perfectly. I think I've written some characters that do come off as stereotypes. But I can tell you what my approach is. My approach is, I think you have to try to push past the stereotype. It's okay to write a Chinese American kid who's super good at math, but he cannot be defined by that. That cannot be the only thing he's got going on, right? And ultimately, I find thinking of actual human being that I know in real life, that I know well, and using that as the basis for my writing will help me push past that.
Yeah, kind of going along with that. The book, the whole saga, a lot of those characters are stereotypical, but stereotypical on purpose. And actually, you did this in American Born Chinese as well. Because the book itself is about sort of the life of those stereotypes in media and how we can address and break down those stereotypes so they're kind of breaking through you're talking about. So, I mean, sometimes it's actually useful to have a stereotype if you know why you have one and you're actually trying to address it. Early good example is Dwayne McDuffie in Icon had this like
Buck Wild.
Buck Wild, that's right. But then he turned into like every black superhero. Like at his funeral, he's like Brother Voodoo and like all this stuff. Right. But it was a really sort of smart kind of trenchant discussion of the politics of comics and the politics of representation. So even stereotypes aren't necessarily totally off the board. You know what I mean? But like there's a potential to use those to sort of have that kind of discussion.
I'm definitely an advocate for reading a lot of reviews and a lot of media criticism so that you're even aware of what the stereotypes are. And, you know, oftentimes you can see the pitfalls that other writers have taken when writing about similar subject matter and be like, oh, I didn't realize this was a trope. Like, it's just the first thing that came to my mind, so I thought I'd write it this way, but then yeah, I try to learn by other people's example as much as possible.
I don't write that much fiction. I mean, I started to, and that's something that I feel like I have to be more aware of when I'm creating characters like that. But for instance, for the nib, like if I'm dealing with a topic that specifically deals with stereotypes, I have to be aware that I have a limited number of images that I have to use, how thoughtful I am about those images. And sometimes I have to actually draw stereotypes. Like, I did this piece called The Fabric of Appropriation in 2015, which is on cultural appropriation, especially in the fashion industry towards Native American designs. So I have to draw a lot of like stereotypical Native American images, and I have to draw, you know, for instance, pictures of hipsters at like Coachella wearing Native American clothing and stuff like that. And like, you know, again, like, I have a limited number of images, so it has to be like a thoughtful image and something that communicates something, and something that doesn't let the, you know, the stereotypes, they have to make a point but not be excessive.
Sir.
A few years ago, I was an article that gave the demographic of, I guess, the mainstream audience.
Right.
And the big three being mostly black male and whatever, powerful. Do you think it will be beneficial for the companies that control them to into their companies because they'll be going against their
Right. Okay, I'm gonna answer this one. No, I mean, in all seriousness, because I'm a professor and like I'm currently working on a book on race in comics, so I spend a lot of time sort of researching this stuff. And actually, I tend to mistrust any numbers when it comes to, you know, what your average comic book reader looks like. I think those things are tautological. They're sort of self-fulfilling prophecies. When I'm in San Francisco and I go into a shop, you know, what do I see in the shop? I see a bunch of people of color, mostly Asians. Like when I'm in, you know, there's Midtown Comics. When I'm in Midtown Comics, what do I see? I see a bunch of people of color, mostly Black and Latino. You know, I've been to Austin exactly once, but when I went to Austin, whenever I'm in a city, I was trying to find a local comic shop, and I walked into the comic shop, and it's all these, you know, Chicano, Mexican people in the shop, right? So like, where are they counting? Where they sort of always arrive at, oh, your average comic reader looks like this, right? And even more so, they say, yeah, well, you know, indie comics only appeal to like, you know, hipster white boys and their girlfriends. Like that's who reads like indie comics, right? But look at this room, right? This room is not hipster. This is the indie comic fest, right? And this room is not like hipsters and their girlfriends, right? That's not who's in the room. So I'm really super skeptical. I tend to trust more what. Like, the movie business does a much better job at tracking the numbers, in part because they actually go to the movies. and there'll be 3 people, and one person will have a thing, and every white person they see coming out of Batman, they're clicking, and there's another person next to them, and every black person they see coming out, they're clicking, and they're in Chicago, they're in New York, they're in LA, and they're trying to see who's going to see what, right? So I tend to think, again, that there are reasons of comfort, reasons of politics that why people are making those statements that don't necessarily reflect, again,
Can I add?
Yes, please.
So, in terms of like indie comics, there is still a large chunk of comics that they don't go through Diamond. They have different ways of being distributed. So, access is another issue with being able to see these comics. When you live in a city like New York, when you live in a college town and places like that, you might have easier access versus other places. Another issue is webcomics. Like we're kind of not counting like the people who read webcomics. The fact that it's a lot of women, it's a lot of people who are in marginalized groups. So like I feel like that often gets kind of shut out. We're still not quite at that point where we're viewing webcomics as an equal.
Right.
And also, just to add, sorry, there was that the fable of the comics industry pre like 2000 that girls don't read comics.
Right.
Everybody remembers that?
Yeah.
And then a lot more manga's being translated. It's like, oh, girls do? It's like, yeah, they just didn't read your comics.
And just to build off that, the number one now, okay. So from 2014, 15, and 16, the number one downloaded comic from Marvel was Miss Marvel, right? But wait, who's downloading it? Oh wow, it seems like a bunch of people who live in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka are downloading this comic, right? So if you're living in like rural Iowa and you walk into a comic shop, you're like, no one reads this. It's like, actually, sure, everyone reads this, but everyone over there, not here, right?
Does Marvel not count their digital stuff? Like, they're always like, nobody's reading this, and then there's like all this data they have.
Anyway. That's a private conversation. All right, yes, sir in the front. Yes.
Sure. My name is Michael. I'm an accredited Master's of Social Work. I'm just considering that because we have a lot of talk on diversity with comics, and this is typical kind of thing, just by the virtue of how things run, diversity has to be embraced by a community. And ultimately, communities, that, like the resources for a lot of people who are on the fence, are people like librarians, other social workers, and community research, like the center, like people who run those, like YMCA, etc. And so, in terms of diversity in comics, what are necessary ways that people who want to create diverse comics reach out to these really hubs of community and resources for other people?
So I'm part of an organization called Women in Comics, the New York chapter, and it's a group of women from all different backgrounds. Some are writers, some are cartoonists. But one thing that the person who's been running it, her name is Regina Sawyer, and she's a great cartoonist, but she's also been setting up workshops through the public libraries in New York and setting up workshops for cartoonists to come in and work with people from these communities and teach them about the basics of making comics, bringing in literature and stuff like that. So I feel like there is a lot of grassroots stuff that can be done to really go into the places where people might not have access to these things. And also reach out, I did a workshop and I got to work with younger girls who weren't even aware that autobio comics were a thing, and I helped them tell their own stories. And that's really exciting both for me, but it's also really cool to give them tools to be able to bring back and work on.
I think also, unfortunately, sometimes it's kind of on the educators and librarians and social workers to kind of meet the artist halfway and maybe find if you have local artists in your community. I know I've done workshops at local libraries where somebody's like, oh, I had no idea you were here. And I mean, part of that's my fault, I didn't go there for the big sign, yeah, your comics coming. But also if people are interested in that, sometimes maybe some online research, or there's all these databases, not all, I should say, sometimes some of that might be helpful. Because I mean, if you find a local cartoonist who just does, editorials for some small local zine or something, they would be so overjoyed to do a workshop. I mean, I speak from experience. You really have to. So like sometimes, even if they're not like a super famous cartoonist or something like that, just like you said, the local kind of grassroots movement, I think, is where that sometimes is.
Oh yeah, and a shout out to local bookstores, can't forget about that.
Oh yes, yes.
Are you saying time's up?
One more question.
Okay, so all right, so we have one more question, and it's actually gonna be for me. Sorry. I was gonna ask the question that he stole, but actually no, because I feel like there are people in the room who are sort of interested in comics, potentially like as a profession. And this is not to depress you. This is just to give you sort of a clear sense of what's going on. Starting with Gene, can each of you talk about the thing? I mean, like now you do this full time, but like when you did American Boy, can you talk about, you know, how you were hustling and you know what it takes, what else you're doing in addition to doing comics?
I got into the comic book industry right at the late 90s. I would go to these comic book shows, and everybody would talk about how we were about to see the death of the American comic book market. Like Marvel Comics had just declared bankruptcy. There were more exhibitors at these shows than there were attendees, even at San Diego Comic-Con. So I came into comics thinking, I'm going to do this because I love this, I want to tell stories. I went full-time less than 2 years ago. And when I did American Born Chinese, I was working full-time as a high school teacher, which I loved. I actually want to go back to that at some point. But what I would do is I would just wake up early and go to sleep late to get my comics done.
I'm very impressed with the people who pull it off with a full-time job, and that's definitely possible. My thing that helps me stay afloat is I'm also an assistant editor at Lion Forge Comics, which is really the perfect complement to doing my own work, because I get to apply a lot of the same skills and types of thinking about from what's a good story generally to what is the most readable layout of word balloons.
Right.
I also have a master's in public health, so I'm a health educator as well. So I actually work at Pratt Institute as a health educator full time, and then I do my comics in the spare time. And I'm not gonna lie, it's exhausting. But like I'm not gonna stop making comics. Like that doesn't feel like it's an option for me. So I mean that might change in the coming years, but for now that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I'm kind of lucky that I've been able to sort of overlap my other career with making comics, because so I just finished my PhD about a year ago. So I was a full-time PhD student for 8 years or something, and stay-at-home dad, and then I did the comics mostly at night and on the weekends. And you know, after I first started sort of trying to be a professional cartoonist past like my 14-year-old, I want to draw a Spider-Man thing. When I was like maybe 20 or 21, my friend and I self-published a book, and actually got carried by Diamond, curious acting, and sold 200 copies, and they were like, get away from us. But you know, I found that comics is not just making books to sell through Diamond to comic shops, and I think that is the thing that has kept me working both from a creative standpoint and from an academic standpoint. Like, you know, I'm an adjunct professor, and every time someone calls me a professor, I kind of cringe a little. No, like, because look, no, no, I just like, I don't know. I feel like you need sort of conversations. Anyway, but like that was never my dream. Was always to make comics, right? But you know, that wasn't paying the bills, and it's still not something I can do full time. But I've only been at it like seriously for like 15, 16 years. So you want to set aside a couple decades. At least 75% of that will be disappointment. 10% crushing disappointment. We'll talk about that later. Anyway, yeah, that's good. I like that. But yeah, just finding ways to sort of keep your love of what the medium can do, I think, is important, even if it's through data.
Please join me in thanking